Alrighty, everyone, welcome to another special production here on Celtics Talk Weekly. We are giving you guys so many presents these last few weeks. We're getting so many good interviews on here. I love it too because I'm starting to get more comfortable in the camera. And today we have another very special guest today to talk all things sports media and Celtics hoops. We'd like to welcome Celtics beat reporter Bobby Krivitsky for Forbes here to the program. Bobby, how are you doing today?
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on. Happy to do so. And I just want to say, I like the intro. That's my first time seeing it. So I thought that was pretty well done.
Shout out to Rob. Shout out to our host, Rob, on here. Did the intro. Phenomenal job, I will say.
Our compliments to the Rob. So our first question here is, what made you want to become a sports media reporter?
I think it's like all of us where we love sports, probably from an early age in most cases, and you're only good enough for your talents to take you so far. So I played in high school and at the collegiate level, I was a student manager for the men's basketball team at Syracuse University, and that was a great experience just getting to be there and to some degree be a part of practices and behind the scenes and everything. So that helps with learning the game for sure and getting that kind of insight. And then at this level, it was always like, even in high school, my reality is that at 6 feet and not blessed with the gifts necessary to go play pro ball. So it was always, even back then, aimed towards sports media. I created a show for my high school called On the Contrary, which was modeled after Pardon the Interruption. I would do play-by-play for sports I didn't participate in. I did radio and did this kind of like youth national sports radio show where I remember getting to interview Vince Wilfork, for example. So it was like anything I could be a part of in the media space, even in high school, I was dying to be able to just experience it and start to develop those skills.
And what led into your decision to go to Syracuse? Was a big part in that eventually wanting to take a career into sports media? Because I know, from my knowledge, I know Syracuse as being the powerhouse for sports media. The Red Sox reporter or the Red Sox commentator. Sorry, you go, Franco.
No, they took over Boston, the Syracuse Orange.
Yeah, I like to think we took over everywhere where there's a major media market. So that was in my opinion, Syracuse University that really high level programs like UC, Northwestern, and whatnot. And you to be a part of one of those, to be one of the high level players in the media industry. But at the same time, that was the big draw and the destination to me. And if you're going to brave the cold over at Syracuse, where you've got that lake effect and the wind blowing constantly, then there needs to be a significant pull and a reason why. And for me, that was the experience and the relationships and everything that comes with the Syracuse University broadcast journalism and that major and that package.
Now, that gets into really another realm of conversation when it comes to media. You went to Syracuse. We've all heard about Syracuse as a media school, but with you going there, what made Syracuse a different school than all the other schools out there for media? What made the difference for Syracuse and media?
It's hard to say just because I haven't experienced a Maryland program or any other school, for example. But for me, I was comfortable with Syracuse. I had gone because my sister, who's older, went there before I did. So I was able to visit and see what it was all about. You combine what that was like with its reputation and everything, and just all the names that they put out there. And I already knew going in that it is very much a network that is willing to help out and is so proud of the reputation and continuing to carry it forward that they will come back and talk and give you advice, and then you can build this network. So to me, everything about how people carried themselves and all of that and what they're willing to do to give back, my familiarity with the program, its reputation, everything just kind of clearly signaled to me this was the right fit.
Yeah, we talk about networking on here all the time and really on and off the program. So, when it comes to universities and media programs, that networking is certainly important. And being a Syracuse alum, in which you are, I'm sure the networking is just robust out there with the amount of Syracuse media members that exist out there in the media field. But go ahead, David.
No, I mean, that kind of was part of my question is, have you had a chance to talk to our very own play-by-play commentator for the Celtics, Drew Carter, about being a Syracuse alum?
Absolutely. Love Drew. And, there was a Syracuse guy on the Jazz roster the other nights. We talked about that, Elijah Hughes. And Drew was on the call when he hit a buzzer beater to get the Orange a victory. So, yeah, absolutely. Love Drew. He does a phenomenal job. I'm glad to have him here. And it's just part of further spreading that Syracuse, that Newhouse Mafia takeover that you guys are referencing.
And hearing about your background, it seems like you've been able to cover all facets of media and really expanded into multimedia. How important is it to be versatile in your approaches to getting your own content out and being a journalist, being a podcaster, being on radio, and being in television as well?
Yeah, I would think that there are few exceptions, like if you're doing play-by-play, for example, but for most of us in the media space, I would quite frankly label that, Franco, as mandatory. If you want to be able to get your work out, build your presence, build your brand, and have people aware of who you are, you're competing with so many people, whether it's within just the Celtics beat, within NBA coverage, or just for people's entertainment, when there's so many options across the board in and outside of sports, that you have to wear multiple hats and figure out how to reach your targeted audience and what you do best in catering to them. So I think that is mandatory. And it's funny, I don't want to get too long-winded, but I can remember coming out of Syracuse, and there were some people in this industry who they didn't like when I would tell them that I genuinely enjoy participating in all facets of this industry in this field. And they're like, you need to pick one and just be more selective. Almost like when you hear people talk about a young athlete needing to be hyper focused on a particular sport. I think that is going down the wrong path. And for me, being comfortable producing a show as well as in front of the mic, for example, writing and then knowing how to edit and video produce content, I think that has really paid off for me.
Now, you've covered both the NFL and the NBA. We were able to take a look at your resume. Couple questions related to that. The first one being, which league was or is your favorite to cover? And which league do you feel is more media friendly, like easier to get a hold of players and members of the organization?
That's a great question. My favorite has been being a part of the Celtics beat. I mean, this is just an experience that I would not trade for literally anything. It's been, as high as my expectations and excitement level were when I first started on the beat, it's exceeded that, quite frankly. And as far as what's the most friendly to work with, in my experience, there's been some NFL locker rooms where, and I don't know whether it is or is not this way across the board in the NFL. Perhaps it is, but in my experience with NFL locker rooms, the access is pretty impressive and media friendly in terms of being able to walk up and have a conversation with a player after the game and get something that's worth sharing with an audience out of that. It's not always like that in the NBA. So from my experiences in the NFL, that's certainly, that level of access goes a long way.
Now, Bobby, did you go ahead, David? Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
Okay. Do you wish at all that you were a Patriots beat reporter with how open the locker room was last year and them giving away basically every single thing at every point of last season?
I mean, it'd be fun to be a part of that for sure, right? But at the same time, there was no part of me that wanted to change beats, and I don't feel that way right now either. So yeah, if you can be, in the room when that's going down, for sure, but you have to appreciate the day-to-day grind as well. And so for me, and what's best suited for my interest in all of that and scheduling wise and everything, I'd rather be on the Celtics beat.
Now, Bobby, on a gamely basis, when it comes to covering the game of basketball, what exactly is your process in producing the content in which you bring out to the users? Now, we were just talking about, and you were just talking about it, how the access within the NFL may be a little bit more friendly than the NBA. Now, did you cover the NBA before the year of 2020? Just real quick.
Yes, but not well. I had been in some locker rooms before, namely with the Celtics, but a lot of my coverage NBA wise before 2020 was remote.
I see. Because I know the media game within the NBA sphere was just a little bit different before COVID, if I'm not mistaken. There was a little bit more access to the players, the coaches, the locker rooms before COVID. To my knowledge, the NBA shut some of that down during COVID, and now 5 years later, literally 5 years to almost a day later, speaking of yesterday, it was the 5 year anniversary of the NBA completely shutting down. 5 years later, the NBA still hasn't brought a lot of that access back into their locker room. So that kind of leads me to the question of what is your process of content making for a game day? What exactly do you produce on a game day, and how do you go about doing that at an arena?
I think it all depends. It's so context specific to who's the opponent, is there shoot around, who do we get at shoot around, what comes out of that, and you might put more into, especially now in my, even the role like someone who is exclusively on the Celtics beat and not covering the NBA from a league wide perspective. They might be cranking something out that's a little more of a preview piece, and that works for a potential finals preview like Celtics Thunder, but it doesn't have the same appeal a couple nights ago when it's Boston versus Utah. So everything to me there is about what does that day look like? Who are they playing? Shoot around is a big part of it, and just trying to provide insight and access and content that people otherwise might not be getting.
Do you have a relationship with any of the players or coaches that you've interacted with?
Define the word relationship there in terms of the spirit of your question.
Sure. So, like a personal relationship, we often talk about reporters, or we hear about reporters giving their phone numbers out to athletes, and them texting them like scoops when certain stories are about to break, or them leaking certain things happening on locker rooms. Do you happen to have more of a, I guess, personal, more close relationship with some players or coaches? I've heard stories about coaches pulling reporters in the locker room to like into their office to go break down film with them or tell them about what certain players need to work on. Has any of that ever happened with you over the course of your media career?
No, neither one of those. I've never had someone pull me aside to break down film one-on-one or say, hey, we saw this in your piece and we didn't think it was accurate. I have had some people, I'm not going to name names, but I've had some people agree to where at least you can be more of service to, again, the audience in getting information and being able to provide that. So there's definitely an element of that, but to kind of go in more like a almost cartoonish degree with the question, it's not like me and someone on, a Celtics player hanging out on a Saturday night or regularly exchanging text messages, but certainly you want to have a relationship. You want them to both know you and trust you. And that, again, the job, getting information is such a crucial element to it that it is important to develop those relationships.
And this could go in tune with your answer to a previous question about how it was so easy. This could apply, I guess, to NFL or NBA. This next question I'll ask you, where it was a lot easier, you said, for you to get access to locker rooms in the NFL and get some good sound bites from NFL players. Have you ever found it where when you've gotten a good soundbite or you've built a good rapport with the player, but say they have a bad game and you have to come out and, maybe write about how they struggled in that game? Have you ever had somewhat of an internal conflict when you're putting out a piece after the team you're covering is having a tough loss and you have to potentially go out of your way to criticize a player that played poorly, even though they've been nothing but good to you in your interactions with them?
Yeah, and I think that's an important question. And for me, the answer is no. I've always been of the guiding light that you have to be objective and you have to be honest, but you also have to be respectful. So even if I'm writing a piece and I don't anticipate the players going to see it, for example, I still treat it like, how would they feel if we were having this conversation face to face? And that doesn't mean that you edit it to sort of acquiesce and make it even more player friendly, and therefore it becomes a bit less honest or a bit less of how you genuinely saw the events unfold. but I do want to be respectful, and I think that's paramount at all times.
And what was your best, or do you have a best or funniest interaction with a member of the Celtics organization that you can think of?
Oof.
And plus share.
What was the second part of that?
And if you're willing to share it, if it's as long if you have a memory, I guess, with someone.
Yeah, I had a moment. We've all had our gaffes at the the podium post game, for example, asking questions, and I had one this year. My memory might be a little bit fuzzy on this, but this is all easy to fact check here. So basically, I knew that we were getting Jason Tatum and Derek White at the podium. I unfortunately can't remember who they were playing that night. I knew we were getting them, and I was so in my own world with writing and then how I wanted to ask Jason a particular question that him and Derek ended up doing the podium together, which almost never happens. And a part of my question that I didn't think to edit in real time was about how he references all the time. He's told me one-on-one, he says it in public, that his favorite teammate is Al Horford. He said it countless times. And I started the question with Derek right there of, my question was about Al Horford. And, Jason, you said it's your favorite teammate. Derek shoots him a look immediately like, et tu, Brutus. Jason starts cracking up. And then, it became a little bit of a thing on social media. So that was my bad right there, that I was so focused on the question and phrasing it properly that I didn't even think of, hey, Derek is right next to him and you're calling someone else his favorite teammate.
Now, bringing up the players on the Boston Celtics, looking at every single player on the Celtics roster, or even the coaching staff as well, you've interviewed a lot of them. We asked Cam when he was on here the other day, who was kind of the most tightly sealed Celtic out there? Who's really the player or coach? We talked about coaches too. Who is the player or coach out there that is just impossible to mine anything good from within an interview, whether it's one-on-one or at the podium? Who's just really tight, locked, sealed, not giving out anything to the media? Who's hard to interview on the Celtics?
Okay, I want to set the precedent that when you ask this question moving forward, you phrase it differently to everyone else after me. So this is going to start post this answer. When you include the coach, Joe Mazzulla is definitely someone who will be tight-lipped. I mean, there's times where he talks about not knowing the injury report only to be informed by us and members of the PR team that it's already gone public and we're aware of it. And there's times where he looks at members of the PR team like, hey, do you want to field this question about the injury report? So Joe, he doesn't want to give away strategy when it comes to injuries. I actually think it's very thoughtful, but he doesn't want to put something out there that either the player himself who's dealing with it wouldn't want out there or wouldn't phrase it that way in that spirit. So it is from a place of certainly consideration and well-intentioned, but Joe Mazzulla, certainly from the Celtics, from my vantage point, is the most tight-lipped, but that's also an easy out. So when you ask the next person who comes on, remove coaches from that and stick to just players.
It's called just outside of Joe Mazzulla. Just outside of Joe Mazzulla. Because also
Exactly.
another question in regard to that is, how many coaches do you actually have access to on the Celtics bench outside of Joe?
I think that's on the reporter to build those relationships. It's not like we're getting Sam Cassell at the podium, for instance, or in a scrum even. So I think that is on the individual to be able to build those relationships.
So that's essentially why it's harder for the assistant coaches to actually be known by the media and by the public, is most of their interviews come probably from a one-on-one setting. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're referring to there stems on both sides, coaches too, and assistant general managers, people on different rungs of a front office. It's on the reporter and those individuals I just referenced in positions like that to advocate for themselves. And so you can't just sit back and go through the motions of your day to day. You need to go out of your way and get comfortable, even if you're not building those relationships.
Now that kind of, we're also on the subject here, and we kind of went more of a direction in keeping the lid on words when it comes to the podium. But really, we know from a content creation standpoint that we love good quotes We love great quotes out of players and coaches, but out of the players, right? Let's throw out Joe Mazzulla here. Out of the players, who actually gives the best answers on the Boston Celtics, and who can you always rely on to really give you good content at the podium every single time?
There's two. And I think for volume, Jaylen Brown has to be the number one answer there. He's always good for multiple really good quotes. And I mean, even when I wasn't covering the team, since he first came on my radar, I've just been impressed by Jaylen Brown, the person, and his mentality, the way he carries himself, his follow through. So to me, you get him on a podium, for example, or even in a scrum. Some players, for example, are not as comfortable in that setting where there's a throng of media and they're throwing questions at you, and some people are louder than others and they're trying to talk over people and whatnot. But in any setting I've seen Jaylen Brown, he's just been comfortable with who he is, and you ask him a question, he's going to give you an honest answer to how he feels about that particular topic, and usually comes away with something where you go, okay, there's a lot of quotes here that people are going to be really interested to hear this thought from Jaylen Brown. And the second one, for a different reason, is Luke Cornett, who's just comedic gold most of the time. So he's not up there nearly as often as Jaylen, but he delivers pretty much every time.
That was the answer I was expecting us to have on this program at some point in time. Luke Cornett, he's like the new age Aaron Baines around here. I mean, really, every single interview he gives, it feels like he's giving out something to the public every single time, whether it's with Abby Chin on the sidelines, even at the podium. That's why I advocate for these Luke Cornett minutes. I mean, really out there, if he scores 18 points, ends up at the podium, we're getting content that night. We're getting content. That's just what it is.
Yeah, I've never seen someone disappointed about a Luke Cornett podium game.
No. Unless we lose, which has happened this year.
So my final media-related question for you is going to be on the topic of Boston sports media from a general perspective. So something that really sticks out to me is JJ Redick went on a radio show here in Boston. I'm not gonna name the radio station, but he went on there and
No promotion over here.
Right, absolutely. No free promotion over here on Celtics Talk Weekly. And when he was talking on there and answering the questions that they gave him, he went back onto his podcast and talked about his interview with these hosts. And he said, if the Celtics win the championship, I don't even know if the fans will be happy, because anytime I listen to media basically in that town, it's just all whining and negativity. So, and from your perspective as a member of the media here in Boston sports, do you think Boston sports media is too negative? Or do you think that they're just good at being the devil's advocate and getting the fans and viewers to understand different perspectives rather than just the regular status quo?
So here's the thing and it's not on anyone to take the time and consideration to properly label these. Most things in life, we just want to put in a box and move on. And if that's wrong, we probably aren't invested in enough to slow down and put that energy to really get it right. And maybe it falls into multiple categories or whatever. But there's a glaring difference between how the fans feel about a topic, how a talk radio host presents and discusses a topic on the air, and how a beat, for example, is covering it and discussing it and feels about it. So there's a distinction. Boston media, quite frankly, is too broad of a brush to paint with, given that when you're including a talk show, I won't name any, no free promos, and when you're talking about them, and that, that can be inherently negative. And so I certainly don't blame JJ Redick for coming away from that experience and then saying, I don't know if this is how the fans will feel about it. And he did say, based on what I'm hearing from the media over there, but the way that they talk about it does not necessarily and shouldn't be assumed that it represents the views of anyone from a different line, whether it's the fans or other media members.
And to transition off of the media to your coverage of the Celtics, we've been getting a few updates about a couple of injuries. One coming from a player, Kristaps Porzingis, via social media, and we also have received a few more updates on Drew Holiday and his mallet finger that he's going through. What is your concern level with the Boston Celtics, and also what are your thoughts on Kristaps Porzingis being the one to update fans on his current injury status rather than the team's PR team releasing a statement or Joe Mazzulla addressing it during an interview?
Yeah, so we spoke to Drew today at shoot around, and I asked him about playing through the mallet finger injury and with the splint on his right pinky. And he kept it pretty simple. He said there's no choice but to play through it and deal with it. He talked about getting more comfortable with it and that it's almost becoming a part of him now. He's had that splint on for a little bit, even though he just returned over the weekend. So he's getting more and more acclimated to what it's like to dribble and shoot a basketball and to catch a pass with that on now all of a sudden. And so I don't think he's too concerned about it. And it wasn't the most efficient performance per se, but he shot the ball fine the other night against Utah. He went 4 for 9, made 2 of 5 threes. So I think that he is comfortable enough and that will continue to grow. And with Porzingis, and specifically the question about him broadcasting his own thing, I think it goes back to what Joe Mazzulla said about he doesn't want to speak for his players about their injuries or illnesses and what they want out there, how they want it phrased. I have no issue with the player putting it out there. I think that is Kristaps Porzingis putting it out is going to get more attention than anyone else putting something out about Kristaps Porzingis. And so I have no issue with him broadcasting and directly connecting with everyone about this is what I'm dealing with. Some people, they wonder, is he going to put this out about an unknown viral illness that they haven't identified and then play 2 nights later? That seems a little weird to some people, but I think quite frankly, that can be a little bit filed under overreaction. And, we saw him out there today and he was getting a workout in and whatnot. He tried to give it a go on Saturday. I thought between his Instagram message Friday that, hey, I'm playing, and then on Saturday, he was doing calisthenics and sprints and some defensive slides. I thought he might give it a go, but ultimately didn't get the green light and wasn't feeling up to it. We saw that happen during the finals too. So I don't mind him putting it out there. I think that's a good thing. And when it comes to his return, he's listed as questionable. He got in some work this morning over at the Auerbach Center. So we'll just have to wait and see on that front.
So what you're saying is the tweet released by Kristaps doesn't concern you right now?
No. The length of this is the most concerning part of it. I also can't help but wonder about if this was May instead of March, would we have already seen him back on the court? And you lean yes, but with an illness, just like with if an injury is severe enough, if you can't go, you can't go. So there's not a definitive answer to that question for sure. But with Porzingis, I think there needs to be an element of caution exercised, and there certainly has been.
And just to give the viewers here, we'll have listeners for this program, but just for the viewers here, here was the actual tweet by Kristaps Porzingis that he released the other night, and saying he hasn't been fully able to identify the viral illness yet, but he's recovering and getting better. But I like what you said there, Bobby, about Porzingis actually reaching out to the public over this, because it does bring another level of connectivity between players and the fans and the public out there to really know what's going on. And we were on post game the other night and we were saying, this tweet is really not a tweet that a team would give out. A PR team wouldn't give out to fans that this guy has a viral illness, but we don't know anything about it yet. And that seems like it was typed actually by Kristaps Porzingis himself, the player. It didn't seem like it was given out by a PR team, whether it was his own or the team's whatsoever. Obviously, it wasn't the team's at all, but that was the actual tweet right there. And initially when it came out, for me personally, I was a little concerned, because it read to me like, oh, we don't actually know when Kristaps Porzingis is coming back. But I also appreciated the fact that you said the length of time in which he's missed is a little concerning, because we had more of a conspiratorial view on here on postgame the other night that maybe this is just a giant period where the Celtics know they can rest Kristaps Porzingis, kind of limit his miles a little bit before the playoffs. But the one question that I raised before that, or really during the event in which the tweet came out and after the game on it was the Utah Jazz game, really I questioned with Kristaps Porzingis, if that was the case, if the Celtics were just resting Kristaps, why would they rest him for nearly 2 weeks? If you're resting a guy for nearly 2 weeks, you kind of have to recondition him, kind of have to reintegrate him into everything you're doing. 2 weeks is certainly no 2 months, nothing like that, but it's also a time period that you definitely need to get your legs back from a little bit. So from the standpoint of Kristaps Porzingis's illness, I just want to see him back out on the floor, obviously to alleviate my concerns from it. But that tweet that came out the other day, certainly interesting from a concern level standpoint of where people felt, because we had a lot of optimists out there, but we also had a lot of pessimists as well when it came to that tweet. But it's funny how we were just talking about the media game, how these kind of things within the media, you have extremist reactions one way or the other. You have either it's nothing or it's everything. And at the end of the day, it's just a tweet. And like you said, Kristaps Porzingis, he continues to be questionable on the injury report. And I like how you gave us that insight too of, well, he's been doing drills as of late. He's been out there on the basketball court. I mean, really, in terms of information, that's really one of the best things I've heard about Kristaps Porzingis is from your mouth on this program, Bobby, is the fact that he's actually out there getting in work. When I see that, I go, okay, well, maybe this viral illness, it's not as bad as we initially thought. And the Saturday return, too, was certainly a possibility. But, David, if you want to spur off that, you can go ahead.
Yeah, it's, I guess, keeping the topic on like injury reporting. How do you view, I guess, like, how much stock do you ever feel like a motivation or an intrinsic motivation to press maybe a coach a little bit more when you see like Al Horford on the injury report for like the 5th time in the last like 3 or 4 weeks with a left big toe sprain? Or do you just have to like take the injury report as gospel basically?
No, I mean, literally everyone, when an injury report comes out and someone's final status isn't on there, we'll talk amongst each other as a beat, for example, and say, hey, do we think this guy's playing or not? We might not necessarily, we're pretty willing to share information. That one can be a different story. And no one's expecting someone, if they have the scoop, to just give it up and let someone else be first with it. But we'll talk all the time about, do we think this guy's playing? Or some people will speak definitively, about, oh, I think player X is going to suit up tonight or will not. I'd be surprised, whatever the case may be. Yeah, though, when it comes to the injury reports and all of that, I mean, look, Al Horford specifically, there's just not a need to follow up. If that left big toe comes up and it's a back-to-back, then you know what the deal is. They might switch up the order every now and then, but you usually know which one of those he's going to play and which one he's going to be in street clothes for. And then other times, like the Al Horford thing, there's not really a need to press about that left big toe.
And what's your stance when it comes to, we're getting closer to the playoffs here? There's 2 ways that teams can really go here as we get closer to April in playoff basketball. Some teams like to ramp up their players' minutes, get them closer to that 40, 42-minute mark a game mark so they can get ready, their bodies ready for the playoffs. Other teams will just start around this time, maybe, a week from now or so with the season, 10 games left, potentially just starting to rest players in and out every game. What is your stance on that? Are you more pro rest as the season starts to wind down, or are you more let's ramp everyone up for the playoffs so that they have some time to prepare for how tough these next few months are going to be?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to treat it like a one-size-fits-all type of outlook and have a general preference. So you look at someone's personal preference, how their body responds to that, where they're at in the ramp-up process, age, mileage, how healthy are they, all of that comes into consideration, as does where is the team in the standings? Do they need these games? Is it kind of already playoff time for this team unofficially, in which case it dramatically changes the equation compared to, for example, the Celtics, who for all intent and purposes, they're locked into the 2 seed.
Now, looking at some of the injuries in which the Celtics have sustained over these past couple of weeks, obviously we were talking about Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps Porzingis did miss most of the playoffs last season. Right now, we're talking about an illness that Kristaps Porzingis, he might be back from soon, might take him a couple more games. We don't really know at this point in time, not really taking things from a catastrophic point of view here, and they're not trying to take things from a catastrophic point of view, but say the Celtics went without Kristaps Porzingis for an extended period of time. Would this current Celtics team be able to win the title this season without Kristaps as they did last year? Essentially last year.
I think so, because they've still been able to be effective when they go double big, and Luke Cornett just continues to get better and better in recent years since they redefined how they want him to play at the offensive end. And I think just being on the floor more as someone who is a cerebral player has allowed him to grow on that side of the ball as well. I spoke with him earlier this season also about finding that line of physicality, and he felt like he had kind of let his teammates down and not being the best version of himself because he wasn't physical enough. Again, that was to start the season. And once he found that line, it has since become something I followed up with him on and said, once you got there, is it okay? I don't need to think about this anymore. It's just kind of automatic. When I go on the floor, I know what it is. Or is it fresh of mind and a point of emphasis every time you go out there? And he said it's the latter. And we've seen him. He's such an effective screen setter, for instance, and he's so good on the glass at both ends of the floor. So he's given them so much, whether it's double big or him as the lone center out there, that I'm comfortable with what him and Horford in particular have been able to provide this team, whether they're in tandem or separated.
And focusing on the rest of the season, what do you see as what do you see as the number one threat to the Celtics as they head into the playoffs and looking to repeat and go back-to-back with NBA championships?
I think the top two threats, one is internal, and that's related to health. A poor shooting performance in the course of a series, much like, that December and January dip, they were not shooting the ball well, and that has significant ripple effects. It can take you out of your rhythm. It can take you out of focus. It impacts you defensively. All these things that kind of snowball downhill and turn into an avalanche because you missed multiple shots, especially when they're quality looks. And during that dip in play, Celtics were creating a lot of quality threes that just were not going in for the most part. They became highly inefficient. And over the course of a game, let alone a stretch that just continues to grow, that can kind of eat at you a little bit. And so there's the internal factors for the Celtics. Externally, I think that they should be considered the favorites against Cleveland. I respect that the Cavaliers, especially after the deadline, they're not going to put a bad player on the floor in the postseason. And Donovan Mitchell has proven that he can be out there against the likes of Jason Tatum and be the best player in that matchup. So you certainly have to respect their firepower and everything that they're doing this season. I would still consider the Celtics the favorite, but externally, the number one threat to Boston is the team they're going to see at TD Garden tonight, the Thunder. Granted, Jalen Williams, hip strain, out for this matchup, but this is an OKC team that, quite frankly, embarrassed the Celtics in the second half of their previous meeting in Oklahoma. So we'll see what it looks like tonight, but that to me is the most likely finals matchup, and that's as vanilla take as it gets because they're the two favorites, even without Boston being the number one seed in the East.
Now, you brought up you brought up December and January with this Boston Celtics club, or rather earlier in the season. And that kind of gets me into a question of right now where the Celtics are in March. Right now, the Celtics are obviously on a much different tear. I mean, they just clearly are from a record standpoint and just from a play standpoint. From where they were in January. January, they were nearly a pure 500 club, whereas now, I mean, they're 16-4 in their last 20 games, if I'm not mistaken. So the Celtics are just absolutely rolling at this point in time. From your perspective, Bobby, what was the difference between the Celtics in January or even late December to the Celtics right now? I know you mentioned the shooting, but outside of the shooting, what else with this Boston Celtics club changed in that time frame for them to change their play and change their record towards a positive level rather than a negative?
Yeah, and I do think the shooting had a lot to do with it. But outside of that, I did an interview for Forbes with Drew Holiday, and he talked about just how, in particular, mentally and emotionally exhausting it can be to reach the NBA mountaintop like they did in June, and then you have to start at base camp and get all the way up again. And you might not crank it up like that in December or January. So there are teams that They see the reigning champs and they see a chance to make a name for themselves, whether it's individually or a measuring stick as a team. And they are as geeked up as you can get. And the Celtics don't feel the same way. And that is a tough difference to make up, especially against teams that are, some of the better ones in the NBA, but still you're not looking at it like, okay, this is a game where we have to bring it. And Kristaps Porzingis, they had a game in Cleveland, a win, where post-game he pretty much acknowledged it. And certainly I'm paraphrasing here, but just that we get it up for the big games is what he said. And you can see it, that their track record against top competition has been indicative and has consistently served as a reminder to anyone who might feel otherwise in these moments of the Celtics. For my money, certainly, they should be considered the title favorites. They have the most talented roster in the NBA, and there's a reason that they are the reigning champions.
And when we see them as the reigning champions, what do you see that this team has transitioned to differently as the season has went forward and, differentiates this championship run from last year's, as we've seen Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum really step up in the their offensive roles, especially in the playmaking and facilitating areas.
Yeah, and I think there is an understanding, again, paraphrasing, but Jaylen Brown, after the Utah game, he got asked about, is it going to be hard for this team to keep its focus down this final stretch of the regular season, given that pretty much you have the 2 seed locked up and you might want to tighten some things up and be at your best going into the playoffs, but there's not really anything on the line right now. And he said he doesn't feel that way at all, that this is where the festivities and everything, and this is getting to be his favorite time of year, and all that stuff is about to get underway, and even acknowledged. So where that question might hold more merit, we're past that phase of the regular season and this 82-game slog. We're now getting to be where names and reputations are made, and we're trying to go back to back and add to our legacies. So I think there's certainly energy that might not have been there at other times during the regular season in past months. And also, I look at Derek White, and at one point he was pretty candid about he didn't have the same level of joy coming to the arena and playing as we're accustomed to seeing from someone who I wrote last year, that it's so important that he brought a level of levity to that Celtics operation as they're going for a championship, and Tatum and Brown are trying to finally break through and get it done. And to have someone who, even in big moments or just on a day-to-day, who plays such an influential role, I think that rubs off on everyone in a positive manner. And to see him figure out how to play through when he didn't have that joy and get back to playing and carrying himself like the best version of Derek White and what it does for this team has gone a long way, as he's been a bellwether for the Celtics this season.
Do you think that people have been too hard on the Celtics this year because of how historic last year was? Because we're still on a 61 pace.
I don't feel like people have crushed them or written them off or, really gone overboard with the level of concern or criticism. So certainly there's been a monitoring of it, especially if you go hyper local, where you are fully absorbing every single game. So when there's an extended stretch where they don't look like the reigning champions and they're not performing up to their capabilities, that's one thing. But even then, I don't think there was anyone who was coming away, or certainly the level of noise around maybe saying something a bit dramatic. I don't think it got there, even if people were wondering, okay, this is still going on. When are they going to shake this off? When are they going to come out of these doldrums? It still hasn't happened yet. It was one thing with a holiday dip, if you will. Now we're getting further into January. It's still going on. So it's one thing to monitor it. I don't know if the noise got too loud, at least in my estimation, on people maybe going overboard with what that did and did not represent.
Now, specifically looking at the Celtics' path ahead and really into the NBA playoffs, the East play-in, this is going to be one of the lesser of the two competitive conversations we're going to have here, but the East play-in, right? The Celtics are likely looking at one of the East play-in teams, the winner of the 7 and 8 game, most likely the Celtics will face. But out of the East play-in, which looks pretty well set where it is right now, could jockey a little bit in there, but the four teams who are in there right now, it looks pretty well set. Out of the Hawks, Magic, Heat, or Bulls, who would give the Boston Celtics the easiest first round series at the moment?
I mean, you know the answer to that. It's the Bulls. And I don't think they'll see Chicago. I don't think they make it out of the play-in tournament, but the Bulls would certainly be the easiest draw of that quartet.
And now, moving out west, because the East, we kind of talked about Cleveland a little bit. We've talked about the East play in here a little bit, mentioning the Celtics' path in the first round, but looking ahead towards the NBA Finals, right? Looking ahead towards the NBA Finals and potentially the Boston Celtics getting to the NBA Finals, who would you like to see out of the West for the Celtics in this season, whether it's I should say, who would you like to see as the Celtics opponent out west from a standpoint of matchup for the Boston Celtics? Who out west that actually has a legitimate shot at contending? So we're likely talking about the top 5 to 6 teams out west. Who within that squad, who within those squads would match up best with the Boston Celtics in terms of the Celtics actually matching up with them best? So who would be the best Celtics matchup in that scenario?
Yeah, we know the NBA would love to see Celtics Lakers, and that was the highest regular season ratings game on Saturday night in 7 years, excluding Christmas Day. So the results speak for themselves on that front. But as far as the matchup, it's the one I've talked about a bunch here now. Celtics Thunder, the best two teams in the league. Let's see it. That was a phenomenal game, albeit you might not have loved it from a Celtics perspective, in Oklahoma City, where the Celtics, they hit them with a pretty good shot in the first half, and then the Thunder came back with a haymaker of their own. I think that should go a long way towards signaling when people wonder about the lack of playoff experience for OKC, that they're probably going to be just fine on that front. I don't think that's what will undermine them, if anything does, if they come up short. So Celtics, Thunder, and the challenges and the answers and the sophistication of these two coaching staffs, I'm guessing, given how much you guys love the game, that you saw Rob Perez, Worldwide Wob, put out the thing of Mark Dagnall, the Thunder head coach, with the permanent sub and keeping Dylan Jones at the scorer's table to try and mess with Nikola Jokic and not allow him to manipulate the game and start to speed things up and start Denver's offense quicker than he appreciates and sometimes thinks he should be able to. So to me, the level of competition there from coaching staff versus coaching staff to the players on the floor, give me Celtics Thunder in June. That's what I think we get, and that is what I'm hoping to see.
Now, looking out west again, now a lot of people think the Oklahoma City Thunder could be that team that comes out of the West this season. There are a lot of people who think the Thunder are a little bit too young as well, but obviously Oklahoma City has the best record out west and looks the most formidable. But specifically looking at the Thunder out west, who is the team out west that you would say has the best chance at actually taking out the Thunder?
Well, it's interesting because size has given them problems, and I know that Hartenstein and to a larger degree Chet have had some injuries this season, but they do have the capability of going double big, yet it's still, they haven't completely remedied that. So you look at, the first thought is to start looking at a team like Denver and Jokic, and that could really cause problems for them. But they looked pretty good against them on Sunday. And so it's going to be interesting to see who they draw, what that playoff path looks like for OKC. I think, again, that they get to the finals, but with LeBron, when he returns from this groin injury, and Luka and that brain power, and they might not have great options at center, but there is a lot of size across the board. I mean, even Saturday, they didn't have Jackson Hayes and they didn't have Rui Hachimura, but they had some options. And when they have those two in the lineup, it just gives them more, especially Hachimura has been so important to how they've defended Jokic recently. So to me, I look at the Lakers and what they were able to accomplish, not just at the trade deadline, but adding Dorian Finney-Smith, a reliable 3-and-D wing with size yet again. I think the Lakers probably can give the Thunder the best punch. You can't rule out the Nuggets, but they just don't have that type of second unit to help them sustain over the course of a series, especially if there's an injury. I mean, Aaron Gordon goes out and that team kind of falls off a cliff most nights. So to me, I look at the Lakers as perhaps being able to give OKC the best shot at an upset.
And speaking
And
of,
to
oh,
look
go ahead,
more at
Franco.
the
Go ahead, Franco. Go ahead, Franco.
sorry, but and to look more at the faces of those teams that you've just listed, we're narrowing down on the MVP race. What we've seen out of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander being able to lead the Thunder to the success they've seen, the best record in the NBA. You see Nikola Jokic continuing to have the remarkable performances that he's had, and also our very own Jason Tatum has put on some great performances and has really cemented himself within the MVP race candidacy. Who is your MVP for this season?
So right now it's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but it's so close between him and Jokic that I hope voters haven't already made up their minds, because I do think that this is something that could turn here down the final stretch of the season, and maybe OKC's standing impacts that, but to some level, and probably more than he's willing to outright acknowledge publicly speaking to the media, SGA wants this award. It hasn't had it yet. And this is as good an opportunity as he's going to get. And so I think that he's certainly going to continue to make a charge for it. I have him in the lead, but it is very close. And Jokic is also having an unbelievable season. He put up that 30-20-20. I believe it was last Friday night. So to me, I would hope that no one has already decided they're ready to hand in their ballot.
I really like that answer from the standpoint of hoping people haven't made up their minds yet, because we cover every Celtics game on here, and we do player of the game. We've done Flowers in the past as well, and it seems like there are games where kind of ready to hand out player of the game at the end of the third quarter, but then the fourth quarter happens, and then all of a sudden we're sitting here scrambling, making different graphics, doing whatever we need to do to get whatever up on screen, and that does pay true to, the game isn't over until the clock hits zero, famous Paul Pierce quote from back when. Uh, Ultimately, the MVP race, it's still fruitful. I mean, look how many games are left on the schedule. There's still about 20 games left. Now, there's not that many relative to the whole season, but when you're talking about that many games and you're talking about some of the stat lines both of these players are bringing up right now, I mean, really, Nikola Jokic, 30, 20, and 20. 30, 20, and 20, and it was more like a 30, 22, 22. I mean, it was absolutely insane. And to be putting up those stat lines and those numbers like that, I mean, Nikola Jokic, obviously an MVP in the past, but certainly deserves his due for consideration for MVP this year. And we all know if he doesn't come in first, he's likely coming in second, which is as significant in historical arguments as well, or just historical context, as well as where a player actually placed within that MVP voting. But certainly MVP at this point in the year, the race is not over. I mean, we kind of gave up on the Jason Tatum MVP race conversation about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, which to some people out there, we may have just seemed like delusionists the whole time. But at the same time, we gave up on Jason Tatum a little bit ago. But these two players are certainly at the top. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Nikola Jokic, they're certainly neck and neck. And I'm with you on that one, Bobby. I hope people have not made up their minds yet, because there's still, I don't want to say a fourth of the season left, but there's still a good amount of games left in time for, the Nuggets to make a run, Nikola Jokic to put up something historical. I mean, this MVP race is not over. And the one thing that does concern me, though, I will say about the MVP race in general, just every single season, is the voter fatigue. How often has a player won? How often have they been in a conversation? I think this year, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would certainly have the advantage over Jokic in that regard. But if you looked at these two players objectively, I think we would all definitely agree that, number one, they're two of the greatest players of our generation. But secondly, I mean, they both, if either one of them won the MVP, they'd be very much deserving of it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that there is enough time left and the race is close enough for it to turn. So SGA is in the lead in my estimation, but I wouldn't want to see anyone call it off just yet.
So we got 3 more questions for you here, and they're going to be more personal questions. We're going to wrap it back around to the media portion of your life here. So who is a dream member of the Celtics organization, past or present, that you'd love to interview or do a piece on that you haven't already talked to?
To clarify here, this might be my fault, but to clarify here, when you say past or present, is that like saying dead or alive, or strictly yes? Okay, so in that case, Bill Russell. I would absolutely love that. And number two, quite frankly, would be Red Auerbach. And to pick their brains, the two architects of the Celtics franchise and why they have the reputation that they do even to this day, what they mean for the game of basketball, certainly Bill Russell's case for what he's done in terms of social justice and his impact off the court, which, as impressive as he was on it, it dwarfs what he did on the parquet. So to talk to Bill Russell about, everything under the sun would be fascinating to get to pick his brain a little. And Red Auerbach, no explanation needed there either. So the two of them, it can literally only be a dream interview, but certainly they're at the top of the list.
With those two names mentioned, I'd be remiss to ask this, but have you been watching Celtic City? And if so, what are your thoughts on that?
So I haven't got around to watching episode 2 yet,
Same here.
I saw the first one and I loved it. And I mean, look, there are people in the Celtics organization that have been there for decades, and there's new information coming to light about this franchise and some of its history and different stories. So I highly recommend someone, whether if you really love basketball or especially if you love the Celtics, you're going to learn new information from watching this docuseries. And I loved the first episode. Can't wait to get to number 2 as well as the rest of the series.
And we asked Cam when he was on here last week, athletes, when they go on podcasts, are often asked what their welcome to the league moment was. So Jason Tatum, I remember when he did a podcast, he said his welcome to the NBA moment was when he stepped onto the floor for his first game against Cleveland, and right across from him was playing against LeBron. And he's like, wow, this is real now. Cam, I asked him, and I'll ask you the same question. What was your sort of welcome to sports media or welcome to the league moment? Cam said, I believe, the first time he went to a shoot around or a practice, and it was Gerald Wallace and Jeff Green, that era of the Celtics, just seeing them shoot the ball around. He was being able to stand right by them, and he's like, wow, this is crazy that I have the opportunity to be here for this. What is your welcome to the league moment?
So first off, I love this question. I love having it flipped around to me. In that interview I referenced earlier, I asked Drew Holiday for his welcome to the league moment because it's such a fun, lighthearted thing, and there's some genuine insight behind it. And he told me that one of his first games, he got out on the floor, and Cleveland has LeBron, Shaq, and Zydrunas Ilgauskas out there, and he literally thought to myself, what am I doing out here amongst these trees? He said, but then, you start to figure it out and you get comfortable. And so for me, I think the same type of thing applies. Certainly it wasn't going head to head against Shaq and LeBron, but it was that my second job out of college was working for this company called IMG Audio. And they are a major player. They've since merged with Learfield, but a major player in terms of broadcasting collegiate athletics. And there's a pretty high percentage chance that if you're watching a college game, they're doing the radio broadcast of it. And so it was a job that required me to wear several hats simultaneously. I would produce the broadcast. I'd be on the air. I'd provide in-game updates. I'd be clipping highlights, all these different things, making sure the audio quality for the play-by-play and color commentary is on point. And so my very first broadcast with them, they have someone show you the ropes and be there to oversee it. And that's like having training wheels on. It is designed to go well. Even if you make a mistake, it's going to quickly get remedied and no one's going to know. That second broadcast, I had some questions and I sought out answers. I felt like I did my due diligence. It wasn't explained in ways that were clear to me. So that second broadcast, which is my first one flying solo, was an absolute train wreck. It was truly a disaster. And there were some critical things that I got wrong, not in terms of anything where I'm on the air putting out incorrect information or playing the wrong highlights or something like that. But in terms of running it from a production standpoint, it went what felt like as poorly as it possibly could have. But from there, you start to figure it out and get acclimated and get comfortable. So from there, I like to think I got really good. And the fact that they would trust me with some major broadcast of primetime games felt indicative of that. But that very first broadcast flying solo was like, there needs to be a grade lower than F for what I deserved for that one.
I think that is such a relatable story in media. I think most people within media have a story like that where their first time somewhere along the line of them doing media anywhere, it's just an absolute train wreck that goes so south. But that train wreck typically needs to happen in order for the train to really get back on the tracks and keep chugging, because the media, it's really a routine thing. It's weird that, we all cover sports here, but the sports world and the media world, they go hand in hand in so many regards to each other. And the process of how you really build up and ramp up to success at the end of a year, at the end of a season, or really within the media just all the time, it's much of the same process, and it's much of the same failures and successes along the way. Obviously, we don't shoot 50% out here, but at the same time, there are going to be mistakes within media. And that story you gave is just completely relatable. I mean, specifically to this program. You look at some of our shows from years ago, and they're not anything like what we're doing right now. Nothing like what we're doing right now.
Oh yeah, you look back on some of your older work. I don't care who you are, but the goal is to grow, right? So you should look at it and kind of cringe and both appreciate where you were at that point in time, appreciate how you've grown, but at the same time, you're gonna be like, oh my God, like, thank God that's in the past and people aren't paying attention to it right now, because that's not a reflection of who I am today.
Yeah, on one hand, it's like it's so cool to see work in the past from your own self, but that cringe part you talk about, I wish that was just I wish that would go away a little bit, because from my perspective, looking back at old things, I always think in the moment of making that whatever I made, say back in 2020, 2021, even before the 2020s, I look at all those things and go, at the time, I thought that was great. I thought that was
Oh
good.
yeah.
I thought that was great. And then you look back at it and you go, oh, wow, you thought that was great. And now look what you're doing today. So, yeah, definitely a lot of those relatable stories out there within media, specifically if you work on media for years and years and years. You have so much growth within that time that you can go back and look at. And that's what I also love about the world of media, is that it kind of gives you that gauge within life to see your progress from one point to another. I mean, it's very fulfilling over time, I would say, personally.
Yeah, I think that was really well put, and it's an essential step in development. So, you don't really want it generating a ton of attention, but you should be able to go back and look at it and laugh. Well, again, that cringe element is unavoidable. We all feel that when we look at older work, especially the further back you go. But at the same time, it's a part of progress and it's a part of the game.
Oh, certainly.
And one final question for you here, Bobby. We talked about earlier, this is actually going to be quite ironic. We talked about earlier, no self-promotion, but let's give you an opportunity to promote yourself here. Where's the best place for people to be able to find you?
And as far, the easiest way, honestly, might be if you just Google my name, Bobby Krivitsky Forbes, as opposed to go to the Forbes homepage. But another way is I tend to do a pretty good job of feeding my Twitter addiction. So I'm over there. It's just my name. I'm not worried about someone taking Bobby Krivitsky on social media. So whether it's an email address or a handle on a platform like Twitter, never been an issue. It never will be. So yeah, over at Bobby Krivitsky on Twitter. I'm also on Blue Sky. So you can follow me on those two platforms and try to put out content daily.
All righty. Well, this was a very fun conversation. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. Bobby, thank you again for coming on. You gave us a lot of good answers here and a lot of good intel into your life in media and your thoughts on the Celtics this season. So we really do appreciate that. Just make sure to like and subscribe. We're going to try and keep doing these with people on every week. We love doing these episodes. Hypes me up for the playoffs. It's great getting people on, great getting some more perspectives on the season. And yeah, that's going to do it for today for Celtics Talk Weekly. We will be back tonight for a post-game show for this big game against the Thunder. Will you be at the game tonight, Bobby?
Oh yeah, I'm literally about to leave right now to head over to TD Garden.
Love hearing that. Alrighty, well, enjoy
Let's
the game.
disclaim this too for the viewers. This is being recorded before that game, so whatever happens in that game, we don't know at this moment in time. We don't know.
Exactly. Alrighty, everyone, though. Go Celtics, and we'll be back later. Have a great day.